Are you living your life with this curiosity about the world, this desire to be accepted? Are you living the world with this desire to have favor in the world? Are you living your life with this desire to prove yourself to the world? Or are you truly following the living God, being where God wants you to be?
Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor Taylor Gadd.
Happy New Year. Glad we're all back. So I think in my life, if I really think about it, the earliest I remember being called to ministry or having some indication that God wanted me to do ministry was in high school. And when I felt that call, I remember at the time feeling like, okay, this is this is the direction that God is going to put my life on. I'm going to go towards either being a pastor or missionary, doing something like that. Well, I don't know where that got lost in translation, but then I joined the Army and I left, and I was in the military for 11 years. And I tell people, it's interesting to see what God did because of that time. Clearly, I was not fully submitted to God's will because I think I heard His voice at some point and didn't obey, didn't choose to orient my life around the things that He had told me to do. I just kind of did my own thing because being in the military sounded more exciting. It sounded like a better time. And so I went in for 11 years. Now, there were things that came out of that. I got really good grades in college because somebody told me you can only get the job you want in the military if you have good grades. So I got really good grades. I got a really good education because of that. I learned a lot of personal discipline. I learned to regulate my schedule and make decisions because they were the right decisions, not because I felt like doing them, not because of my emotions about them, but just to do them because they were the right thing to do. I learned a lot of leadership. I learned how to motivate people and to talk to people and to solve problems. I learned a lot of confidence. I have maybe too much confidence now because of my time in the military. And so the interesting thing is, even though I took an 11-year detour from what I really think God told me to do, He used all of those experiences and things to cultivate me into a certain kind of person, making me the pastor I am now. I am a certain kind of pastor. Now, I've debated in my head, would I have been better off? I'm still working through my seminary degree right now online. And I think sometimes, wouldn't it have been better to graduate college and go straight to seminary and be in class, because I hate online school and it's just the worst, but it's also this blessing because I can still do everything else I normally do. I don't have to move anywhere. But I think, wouldn't it have been better? And then I think, well, maybe I can't really say that, because even though I think, well, that would have been an advantage of doing it that way, there's a whole bunch that God has made me a certain kind of pastor through those experiences, through those things, and they wouldn't have happened. None of that would have happened, right? And so how can I possibly judge what really would have been the better path, except to know that God clearly used the path I was on to make me the person I am? So it's strange to me, because even though I didn't obey the Lord, He somehow still worked it out, not only perfectly, probably from His perspective, but to my benefit. God won, even though I was making a lot of stupid decisions. The interesting thing is, I also took some baggage out of my time in the military. I've had to do some healing from some of the decisions I made and some of the bad choices that I lived through. And yet, God didn't let any of those hinder His plan for me to be in ministry. See, once again, God won, even though I did it basically maybe like the roughest possible way. Right? I didn't have to go through some of the things I went through, but I did, and God used them. See, God will get you to the point He wants you to be at. He will get you there. He will finish His work, but your participation in that is what makes it more or less painful. You can make God's will for your life as painful as possible by being drugged, kicking, and screaming, or you can get on board you can participate in that lesson, and it can go well. I tell people that the lesson that I have learned the easiest in my life is the lesson of money. And the reason is not because I'm super good with money. The reason is because it was the only lesson I've ever been on board with before God started teaching me. I would go and I would pray, Lord, teach me about money. Teach me what you want me to do with my money. How should I honor you with my money? How should I spend it? How should I save it? What do I do with money? Well, the interesting thing is then I've gone through periods where I made a lot of money. I've gone through periods where I lost a lot of money. But in both periods, I saw God answering the prayer, teach me about money, and it was way less painful, right? I could lose a certain amount of money on something, and instead of the anxiety of like, I can't pay my bills and I don't know what to do, it was just like, okay, this is an answer to prayer. God's teaching me about money. It wasn't painful because I was actually participating in it. I was on board with what God was doing. And God will still manage to get me to the place He wants me to be, whether I participate willingly, begrudgingly, openly defiant. He's going to figure it out. Now, we're in a series called The March of Redemption. Now, I want to recap. We're starting a new year. We've got some new faces. Let's talk about what the March of Redemption is. We're going through the book of Genesis. We've been doing it for over a year at this point. We've only made it to chapter 34, so we're really crawling our way through it. But Genesis is really a book where God makes a promise, right? At the very beginning, everything's right. Very early, chapter 3 of the story, everything falls apart. And in the middle of everything falling apart in chapter 3, in that same moment, God steps forward and says, I'm going to fix this. He makes a promise. He says, I will give you a seed, an heir, a descendant, a seed that is going to bring you into the land, the promised land. Now, the interesting thing is there is really this, those are the two themes, the seed and the land. And what we see is that the seed is surviving over and over again through all of the challenges of Genesis, all of the things of humanity that are trying to swallow up the seed so that the people of God can be in the land. Now, there's an immediate reference to the audience that's reading it that is the promised land, that is the area, the Fertile Crescent where Israel is today, or part of where Israel is today. And that definitely is apparent to the people that are reading Genesis for the first time or hearing Genesis for the first time. That being said, there's a deeper level to that for us, which is that the land is heaven. God is bringing us, He has promised us that through His seed, His descendant, which we know is Jesus Christ, He will bring us into the promised land, which is heaven. He is taking us there. And what we see in Genesis is that nothing can stop it. Nothing can stop it, right? There's the very next chapter. Everything falls apart. God makes a promise to the seed. Chapter 4, Cain is the firstborn. He should be the seed. But he rebels and kills Abel, who could have also been the seed, even though he was the secondborn, thus taking out the first two candidates to carry the seed forward. The story should end immediately. No seed. We're done. We just killed the first two candidates right out of the gate. There's no chance for us. And yet, we get Seth, and the seed continues. It goes right up until the flood, when the whole world, when all peoples are wiped out except for Noah, who is carrying on the seed, and so on and so forth. And we eventually come to Abraham, and then we have Isaac, and now finally we're talking about Jacob. And Jacob has been renamed Israel. He's been told, you are essentially the one who's going to start the nation of Israel. That's going to be the descendants, be the seed, right? And what's special about Israel? Someday Israel is going to be the nation that the Messiah comes from, that delivers to us Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus is for all peoples. It's not just for Jews or Israelites, but He comes through that nation. They are the descendants that bear the descendant, right? And so Genesis is showing us that this promise of redemption cannot be stopped. It marches through the generations one at a time without fail. And just like pretty much every chapter in Genesis, today, as we look in chapter 34, we're going to see another threat to the extinction of the seed. Once again, it's possibly going to get wiped out and the story ends, and that's all there is to it. Now, the last couple of weeks that we've talked about this, we've seen Jacob, first of all, he was saved from Laban, who was pursuing him towards the promised land. Then he was saved from Esau, who met him when he came into the promised land. And twice, God has basically performed a miracle to stop somebody from destroying Jacob, who's right now is the bearer of the seed. And as he has saved him, he's also managed to back Jacob into a corner, because Jacob's always kind of handled his own life, made his own decisions. And Jacob, for the first time, is beginning to really submit. He's beginning to say, okay, God, I'll do it your way. I will give myself to you, but you have to bless me. You have to be my God. And so God is beginning to really change Jacob, but we also saw little indicators that Jacob, he didn't just get perfect overnight, right? He's still pretty flawed. He's had his whole life to make bad decisions. Those don't just disappear because you finally submit to the Lord. Okay? So, in this story, I want you to see that God seems to be absent. As we look at this story, God does not seem to be present in this entire chapter. Okay? Now, why is that? The author does this a few times when he wants to show you you're supposed to look and see that God's will is being accomplished either through people making their own decisions or even in spite of people making their own decisions. This chapter is a lot of the in spite of category. We're going to see a lot of people acting as dumb as possible, and in spite of them, God is going to be the one that comes out on top. It's going to be that God wins again, right? God is the only one who wins. And so that is what we're going to see today. Now, I want to give a disclaimer. This is one of the rated R chapters of the Bible. Okay, some of you are going to be shocked that this is even in there. And this isn't even the worst one of what I would consider the rated R chapters. But the disclaimer today is that we are an adult Sunday school class. Okay, this is a young adult audience, so we don't skip over the hard parts. We're going to talk about the hard parts, and I just want to prepare you. Okay, and as a side note, if this is too much for you, listen. You are not. No one's going to think poorly of you because you don't want to sit through this chapter. Okay, just know that you have an open invitation. If you need to separate yourself, understand that that's okay, because one of the themes of this chapter is a rape. Okay, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And before I get into that, I just want to say that if you have ever dealt with that, if you have experienced something similar or along those lines, we want you to know that you do not have to go through that alone. We do not want you to feel isolated or trapped in that. Know that there are so many women in this church who would love to walk through that with you. Or you can always talk to me. I understand if you don't want to talk to me, okay? But you can talk to me, and you can talk to so many other people, okay? You're not isolated in this. And as just a point of reference, because we're talking about it, there is a percentage of men who have experienced that, okay? You are also not isolated. It is something that you are. Please don't let the enemy trap you in something where you're constantly traumatized, where you're constantly told, somehow it's your fault or anything like that, okay? I want you to understand that you don't have to be alone in that, okay? So if you're dealing with something along those lines, I pray that this lesson is not triggering for you in that trauma, and that you can see what God's word is trying to tell us, but just know that we're here to help, okay? We don't want to ignore that. That's something that we care about, okay? So we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to talk about is living in a broken world. So look at Genesis chapter 34, starting in verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her and raped her. But he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife." Okay. All right. So first of all, the first thing I want to do is I want to paint a picture of the difference between what's happening right here and the way our modern conception of rape works. Okay. And the reason for this is because some of what happens in this story does not make sense if you're picturing it the way that we often picture rape. Okay. So let's just talk about the contextual difference that's happening. Okay. Rape, a lot of times in this period, was not necessarily the violent, abusive version we see today. Now, Don't hear me wrong. I am not going to stand up here and say, so it's totally okay. It was a different thing, right? That's not my point. My point is, there's a way we have to see this to explain Shechem's follow-on reaction, right? He actually loves this girl. What makes it a rape is not that it was necessarily done in an abusive or violent way. What makes it rape is that she is now disgraced, and in this time period, she is worthless. Okay, now, what does that mean? Understand, we're in a different time period and culture. She has no ability to provide for herself economically in the society of the time. What does that mean? That means that she is technically a burden, an economic and financial burden on her family, and she will someday be an economic and financial burden on her husband. And that's just the case of the culture we're in. So here's why that's important. If you were raped, if you were disgraced, if your worth in this society is taken away, you're an economic burden with no prospect of getting married. You know what happens to women in this culture, in this time period, when they get raped? They get left in a ditch to die. It doesn't matter. Either their family has enough graciousness to kind of just bear that economic burden until the day they die as an old maid, or they're born destitute. That's it. That's what happens to women in this society. This is why I had somebody come to me, they were reading, I think it's in Deuteronomy, where it talks about how if a woman is raped, then the man must pay money to then marry her. And instantly your reaction is like, the Bible says that you have to marry your rapist? That's horrifying. Okay, but it's a different thing. Again, this is not about abuse and violence. This is forcing a man, essentially, think about it like this. Rape in this setting is more of just like a premarital sex problem. It's about the fact that you did things out of order, and now you've taken away this girl's ability to live in the world that she's in. And so what the Bible is doing is actually revolutionary. The Bible is so pro-women that at a time when women had very little status and rights, the Bible is saying if you dishonor a woman in a way that now she's going to die destitute and alone, you have to not only pay money to her family, but then you have to marry her and make it right. You have to take care of her, which is not telling women marry this man who's abusive and violent towards you, who's going to use you. It's actually telling the man, hey, time to be a husband to that girl that you loved enough to dishonor and disgrace, do things backwards from. All right, it's actually fixing a problem that's in this society that's way worse. Okay, so again, a lot of that takes some processing power for us because none of that lines up with how we view rape, how we view premarital sex, how we view women. Right? It's just a different time period. Okay, so that's all important to understand to then see what happens next, which is that Shechem is going to enter into marriage negotiations for this girl, right? And again, that doesn't make any sense to us in our society. So again, none of that is making what happened right, but you have to understand it to understand the story. You have to understand the differences. Again, think about this. This happened thousands and thousands of years ago, okay? There's a lot of differences between our society and their society. Okay, the last thing that's hard for us to understand, I want you to see this, is that the audience, right? Who's the audience? The Jews, the Israelites that are walking around in the wilderness. They are following Moses. They followed Moses out of Egypt. They are the ones that are reading and hearing these stories and understanding their heritage, understanding who they are and what God is doing with their nation, okay? So Moses, as he's writing this, he's going to write a lot of things in here, and he's going to say, this is something we know is wrong. And he's going to kind of wink at a lot of those things, right? But even when Moses is writing this is way after these events happened, right? And so some of it you have to understand from the audience's point of view, okay? So there is a point in this where Dinah herself is at fault. And again, so that we're clear, so that we can process this correctly, this is not a form of victim blaming. This is not like she was asking for it or something like that. Okay, that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that Dinah herself is being painted in a certain picture to the audience that's reading the story. And what that picture is is that instead of staying in the safety of her family, instead of staying in the shelter that she had with her family, she has let her curiosity about the world call to her away from her family and away from her safety. She has gone off into dangerous places. She has essentially not been content with the safety that God has given her, and instead has decided, I'm going to go see what these people in the land are all about. And we've been told over and over again at this point that they're not supposed to be sharing lives with the people in the land, right? God has separated this people because someday they're going to bring about the Messiah. They're special. They're not supposed to be integrated. And Dinah is doing the exact opposite of that. This would have been a warning sign to the people reading this story of God has given you protection and shelter in your people. Do not wander away into the world and let the world take you. The world is broken. Now, that doesn't mean that if you only hang out with church people, nothing bad will ever happen to you. That's not the point. Bad things will happen to you. But listen, this is literally my life. I wandered away from the safety of God's plan for my life for 11 years, and I dealt with a lot of junk. The world took advantage of me. The world defeated me in a lot of ways. If you don't let God protect you, if you decide that the world is going to be your God and you're going to participate in it, it will defeat you. I mean, it will overwhelm you. And so there is a lesson in there in that way in this story. Now, God is still going to redeem what happens here, and we'll see that. But just know that's kind of the setting as we enter into this chapter. Look at verse 5. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter, defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob said nothing until they came in. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard about it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing ought not to be done. Okay. So first of all, Jacob is pretty calm. He has a pretty mild reaction. He kind of stays silent, really. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, and one of them is he clearly doesn't have any backup yet. Remember, they're sojourners. They're visitors in the land. They're outnumbered, and they got a lot to lose. They are very wealthy. We're going to see even more of that here in a minute. But Jacob's response is not really of heavy concern for his daughter Dinah. Now, why is that? One of the reasons for this is because Dinah is Leah's daughter, and Jacob clearly does not care about Leah's children as much as he cares about Rachel's children. So in this moment, what I want you to see is in Jacob is that he's being very selfish. He's having a very self-centered reaction. Instead of having a reaction just for the sake of his daughter, he's having a reaction where he's thinking through, what do I have to lose? How could this go wrong for me? Right? He doesn't want to be on the bad side of the land and the world around him. So he is having a self-centered reaction. Okay? There is a broken world around us. And if you either wander off into it or you care more about what it thinks of you, it will try to consume you. That is what we've already seen in this story. We have two characters so far, and both of these characters have already had some kind of wrong reaction, and there's already begun to be consequences. There's already begun to be bad things because of this broken world. Look at verse 8. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage, and intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. So you will live with us, and the land shall be open to you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it. Shechem also said that her father said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your sight, and I will give you whatever you tell me. Demand of me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give whatever you tell me, but give me the girl in marriage. Okay. So there's two things I want you to see about this portion. One is they begin to offer them what? They offer them the land. They offer them the things in the land. What have they already been promised by God? that land and the things in the land. God has already given them. We've seen this over and over again. This is throughout the Bible, actually, is that very often the devil and our enemies and the world will offer us counterfeits, subpar versions of what God has already told us is ours. Right? There's this temptation in the world. This is literally the temptation rendered to Jesus by Satan in the desert. Jesus already has the authority and the promise of all things in all creation through all time, and yet Satan comes to him and says, just do it my way. Just bow to me and I'll give you everything. That is one of the major temptations in the world, this lie that the world can give you what God has already promised you. First of all, the world doesn't have what God has already promised you. They can't possibly. They can give you a lot of stuff, but it's all counterfeit. It all burns up in the end. It all disappears. Only God can give us something eternal and enduring. So in this moment, they're being offered the land and the things in the land, but don't forget, they already have a promise that they're going to receive all these things. The second thing we see here is again, keep in mind the audience. The audience knows there is a prohibition to intermarry with the people of the land. And we've seen that actually, even the people living the story out, right? Isaac was like, do not marry any of these Canaanite women, right? Abraham tells his servant when he's getting a wife for Isaac, like, go back to my people and get him a wife, but do not give him a wife from this land, right? They know they're not supposed to intermarry. Now, why is that? It's always like this confusing, like, racial prejudice thing because we don't really understand why, but this story actually makes it as explicit as it can be. If they intermarry, the reason is to become one people with that people. They will lose their identity. They will mesh in with the people of the land, and they'll just be Canaanites. That'll be it. There won't be a nation of Israel. The seed will disappear. The promise will disappear. Redemption for all mankind will disappear. And so, it's not, because here's the thing. You were welcome to join Israel. There were tons of ways, there were tons of rules for how you could become a part of the nation of Israel where you could mesh into them. The intermarry prohibition is because those intermarriages often caused the Israelites to mesh in with the people of the land. They lost their identity, right? And so when you think about like Ruth, right, the story of Ruth, she's a Midianite. She's in the lineage of Jesus. But what did she do? She gave up her identity, her home, her gods to become an Israelite, not the other way around. So this proposal to intermarry makes it explicit why it's such a problem, and it's because they're going to lose the promise. They're going to lose their national heritage that's just begun to form, by the way, right? Because so far we've got Jacob and 12 sons. That's Israel right there. And so this is a huge threat. Okay, look at verse 13. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, we cannot do this thing that is, give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you. If you will become like us in that every male of you will be circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you do not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go. Okay. One of the immediate questions that I asked right here is, does Jacob know they're lying or not? We don't really get an answer to that. It's weird because clearly the brothers and the father all have a vested, again, economic interest in their sister daughter, and so there's a negotiation happening, but Jacob has basically taken a step out of it, and the brothers are the ones that are leading the negotiation. Now, we don't know if he knows they're lying, but the author does, right? The author wants you to know from the beginning they're lying. They have a plan, right? And so I'm not going to delve super deep into circumcision. I wouldn't Google it, but if you don't know what that is, maybe ask your mom or something. I don't know. So, but here's what I do want you to see. They're making a mockery out of circumcision. Okay, think about what circumcision was supposed to do. Circumcision was a national identity promise. It was a covenant between them and God that separated them from the peoples around them. The true point of someone being circumcised was to become Israelite, and they are making a mockery out of this by saying, if you'll just do this physical action, then we can become you. We can join you because you'll look like us. That's not what circumcision's about. That's not the point of it. That's not the purpose of it. They are lying in a way that is disgraceful to the covenant that God has given them to take seriously. Okay? The third character in the story, we've had Dinah, we've had Jacob, now we have the sons, and so far, everybody sucks. So, we're not supposed to join the world. Now, the interesting thing, the ironic thing, is that the sons lying is them joining the world. They're not handling this like believers in the one true God who trust Him to take care of their problems. They're handling this just like the world. They're saying, you have to look like us so we can join you, when in reality, they're doing something that's making them look like the world already. They already look the same. Because the covenant has no purpose if it's not representative of your actions and your heart. They already look like the world. Do you look like the world? Do you look like the world and just label yourself differently? Well, I'm a Christian, but literally everything I do looks just like my non-Christian friends. Like that should be horrifying to you if the only discernible difference between you and your friends is that you claim the title. It's not just going to church, owning a Bible. It's about your heart posture. It's about the gospel. See, here's the thing. You have been saved, bought by blood, so that you could be separated from behaving the way the world behaves. So that you are not trapped in the way the world handles things. God has made you right with Him. That's the point of the gospel. And if you've been made right with God, then you have the right and freedom to act in accordance with the righteousness that you've been given. So if you never do that, the question is, what makes you think you have it? What makes you think that you've been given it? Right now, their actions are displaying a mockery of what they say they've been given, which is this national identity, this separation from the world. They're using it instead as a tool of deceit and manipulation. Don't negotiate with the world. Look at verse 18. Now the words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do this because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was more respected than all the household of his father. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the people of the city, saying, These men are friendly to us. Therefore, let them live in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. We will take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on one condition will the men consent to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us must be circumcised just as they are circumcised. Will their livestock and their property and all their animals not be ours? Let's just consent to them, and they will live with us. Okay, can you imagine this sales pitch? Because it's a little mind-blowing, right? They show up, like the city gate is where like business and deals were done, right? That's where you went to like meet with the respected people as they came in and out of the city to do their business. And so the sales pitch is like, you want to get rich? There's just one thing that we all have to do, right? It's like, I mean, and here's the thing. Just read verse 24. All who went in and out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. Okay, not one holdout. Nobody was like, listen, man, I love you, but no, miss me with that, right? Like, no, nobody. So it apparently they had a lot of respect. They had a lot of influence because they're able to convince everyone. Now, here's the deal. one of the things that this does tells us is that Jacob and his sons must be obviously extremely wealthy, right? So wealthy that this entire population is like, you mean we can marry into that wealth, right? It's like they know, like, we're about to make alliances and marriages that are going to set us up for our lifetimes, right? Easily. Our kids' lifetimes. We're going to be that rich and that wealthy. Okay? So they want the blessings that God has given Jacob and the nation of Israel up to this point, but they want them without God. They want them without having to actually submit to the God that Jacob follows. That is not the way you get the blessings of God. Look at verse 25. Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city undetected and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Jacob's sons came upon those killed and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. Okay, so it's 3 days later. They're sore. Lots of ice packs, I'm sure. Here's the thing. It's funny to me. I'm sorry, I can't stop laughing at this text because it's funny to me that it says like they came in undetected. Because here's the deal. Like if my dogs are barking at something in the backyard, I'll get up and check. But I'm pretty sure in this setting, nobody's getting up to check, right? So it probably wasn't that hard to like sneak in, you know? Everyone's just like, I'll figure it out later. The dogs bark a lot, you know, it'll be fine. And so they come in and they kill everybody. Now, here's the thing. Only Levi and Simeon come in. But here's the key. Dinah has a lot more full-blood brothers than just those two. This immediately is an indicator that the rest of the brothers didn't agree with this action. This was two of the brothers that took it upon themselves to go commit this action. And this is not an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Part of what we begin to see, because when you first read this passage, you're like, I don't understand necessarily why this is wrong, except that it's so excessive, right? They lash out at an entire population area, and they kill every single man. This is murder and cruelty. They are not the good guys in this moment. Now, verse 26 is interesting because if you read the story, it's more apparent than you might think. But when you first just glance at it, verse 26 is the first time that you might think, oh my goodness, Dinah has been captive this entire time. She didn't go home. Like the negotiations weren't like she stayed with her brothers until they got things worked out. She's been in Shechem's house this entire time for 3 days. I want you to see that in this moment, God is rescuing Dinah. She wandered away from the safety of home. She wandered away from the shelter that God had given her, but God doesn't abandon her. God doesn't just let her be taken captive. He does redeem her. He does rescue her, and he does even using the violence and the blood of her brothers. Okay, this right here, if I was going to circle really the gospel message for us, God will not let us be taken captive. And in this life, there are times when it looks hopeless, when things look bad, when the world looks like it has the upper hand. But ultimately, God is about the business of redeeming his children and bringing them home, even in spite of their own bad decisions. I wandered off into the world and I found and participated in the evil of the world, and yet God did not let me be taken captive. He did not abandon me. He came and rescued me. And I don't care what you think you're caught up in. I don't care what you think you're trapped by. I don't care maybe you don't want to obey God in some way because you think you might get trapped. God does not abandon his children. He does not leave us to be captive even when we're the ones that put ourselves in captivity. God rescues us and he heals us from sin. I want you to see something else here. God is fulfilling another promise. He told, from the earliest times, he has told the nation of Israel, he's told the seed, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And in this moment, the people in this town, they have cursed the nation of Israel. They have raped and kidnapped one of its daughters, and then they have come up with a plan to basically annihilate it, to absorb it into their own wealth and their own pocket. And God lets there be a retribution against them. Now, that doesn't mean God commissioned it, but God ultimately is the one who wins, because the nations of the land get judged when they come at His children and His people. And so in this moment, God is, again, the only one winning, even as Simeon and Levi, the tools of God's judgment on these people, are losing because they look like the bad guys. They look like murderers. They look like they've gone too far. Look at verse 27 again. Jacob's sons came upon those killed and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, and their donkeys, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field. And they captured and looted all their wealth, and all their little ones, and their wives, even everything that was in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me repulsive among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since my men are few in number, they will band together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, and I and my household. But they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Okay. Now, you can see the issue clearly here because of the excesses, right? Not only did they kill all the men, but then they looted. They turned the women and the children into slaves. They took all the livestock. They even went into the houses. Now, here's the thing. The indicator in the language is that Simeon and Levi did the killing, but all the brothers joined in the looting. In this moment, nobody cares about Dinah. All these young men are taking an opportunity for monetary gain. They are pillaging and plundering. They look just like the world. This is how the Canaanites would have handled this. They don't look like the nation of Israel that they're supposed to be. They don't look like they're following the one true God. They don't come out looking good. I want you to see everyone involved in this story. Let's go through them. Dinah is curious about the world. She finds it, but even so, she's rescued. Jacob is worried about his favor with the world, and yet he's made repulsive, because the Bible says being a friend of the world is having enmity with God, is being God's enemy. The brothers, they want to look strong. They have a pride against the world, and they are the only ones in the story that end up cursed. And actually, when we get all the way to chapter 49, we're going to see Jacob double down on that curse and say that Simeon and Levi are the only ones not getting blessed because of their cruelty and their malice. God opposes those with pride. The Hivites, they wanted the blessings of God without God, and they lose everything. These are the options available to us in the world. You can get the world. You can gain and try to gain, but in the end, you will end up with nothing. Because everything around us is going to burn up the day that heaven finally comes. You can be the brothers living in pride, but God will actively oppose you. You can be Jacob and want the approval of the world, but if you're a child of the living God, the world will never accept you. You will be repulsive to them, which, by the way, we're going to see in the following chapters how that's a blessing to Jacob, that he is made repulsive. It's a good thing for the world to not love us, because then we would be absorbed into it. And if you're Dinah, even if you have failed, even if you have walked away, even if you've been taken advantage of, by no fault of your own, God has not abandoned you. He has not left you. He wants to rescue you. He wants to redeem you to Himself. In this story, God is the only winner. Now, God takes care of His children, but only God's will gets done. Everybody else comes out looking bad or just damaged. How are you living your life? Are you living your life with this curiosity about the world, this desire to be accepted? Are you living the world with this desire to have favor in the world? Are you living your life with this desire to prove yourself to the world? Or are you truly following the living God? Being where God wants you to be. See, here's the interesting thing. And again, we're going to talk more about the last couple verses in this chapter next week when we talk about chapter 35. But here's what I want you to see. Jacob is back in the promised land after all this time that we've been working our way towards the promised land. But he has failed to get all the way to Bethel. And he is camped here. And what we're going to see is that God has made him repulsive to move him one more time to exactly where he wants him to be. You can participate in God's will, and it's wonderful. It's joyful. Or God can get you where he needs you to go, where he wants you to be against your will. Ultimately, it will still be better for you, but it will not be fun in the process. We serve a sovereign God, and he's so sovereign that he loves us too much to not bring us exactly to where he has for us to be. He won't fail us like that, even if we don't like it. This week, this year, as you start out this year, as you begin to examine your life in 2025, and you have your New Year's resolutions and your goals and your aspirations, and who knows what this year could bring. Examine how you're living in the world. Are you negotiating with a broken world? Are you participating in it? Or instead, are you focusing on the one true God and following him?
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor of Young Adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and the sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.